Matthew Bladel, welcome to the podcast, my friend.
Good to be with you.
It's really good to see you. Us. I'm super excited for this. I'm really honored that you're here. I'm honored that you are willing to open your heart and share today. And we're going to go all kinds of fun, deep places. Right before we started recording, I shared that it's been sort of my hope and my dream that one day we'll have the chance to record. So it's a super special morning today for me. And, you know, it is a little intimidating because you're such a special dude and you have this stoic nature about you that's so wise and so deep. And you've called me up so much in my life. And I'm just excited for this. I'm excited for people to hear what's on your heart, where you're at, where you're going. And so this is just going to be super fun. So firstly, I'm just super grateful and I'm proud of you.
Thank you, brother.
For showing up here today. I think it's important that people know your story. And I'm going to let you kind of start with that because it creates an important foundation for the listener. Maybe you start out with, childhood, where you grew up, grow from there, a little bit about the business, and then Let's get into your personal story.
Yeah, that all flows together pretty well. So local boy, grew up in San Juan Capistrano, just down the way from us here in Irvine, and played soccer, was an athlete. I think that was a big part of my identity. Got away to Gonzaga to play soccer up there for 4 years. Tried to mess around a little bit with soccer after school, and right about the time that my dad had started the business that we've now been in for, this is our 25th year, recognized something about soccer that was interesting to me, and it was that I didn't really like soccer that much. What I recognized was that the thing that I loved most about soccer was pulling on the same end of the rope with a bunch of people who I wanted to be around and who I could tell were cheering for my success, right? And that's a difficult thing for, I think, any kid, but I think for me it was, how am I going to translate this thing that I've enjoyed so much my whole life into making money or whatever is next? And the family business provided me that opportunity because our first 9 hires were actually former college soccer teammates of mine. We had a couple others interspersed in there as well, but the foundation that was created by my father and I in sports kind of continued in the beginnings of the business, and then really was just furthered by all these wonderful young men that we knew in and out, having played together. And so that really created a foundation that we grew through in the business. And a handful of years after that, I met my wife, Michelle. Got married when I was 29. And within about a year's time, I got married. I bought into the family business. So instead of just working for my dad, I became an owner of the business, and started a secondary athletic pursuit, which was jiu-jitsu. So it was a little over 15 years ago. And the 3 of those things coming together, marriage, being an owner, and learning through martial arts, really gave me a view into life that I was so desperately craving, because so much of my life at that point I had felt kind of crushed by what felt like adulthood and in teenage years. Like I saw my parents, we were so close. They're still together. They mentored marriage so beautifully. But from a professional standpoint, I looked at my dad's career. He was a very hardworking guy, Midwest roots, and his career just continued to lead him to failure, mostly because he was working in companies that didn't align with his values. Had a lot of success, but just on the values side, it continued to be difficult. And so being a young person and looking at that, it's like, hold on, if the most integrous, hardworking, incredible person I've ever met, and my dad, can fail this mightily, what possible chance do I have of this thing? So going back to that opportunity, it's like even in my late 20s, having worked for a few years, it felt like I hadn't been crushed by life yet, but I knew that was waiting for me. What's that going to be? Like, business is going to be hard. It's been hard already. It feels like harder times are coming. Marriage, as beautiful as that is, it's like, this is so wonderful, but now you've got somebody who's constantly holding up a mirror, showing you the things that are unmended, or that you haven't grown into in a way that you've never seen before. It's like, that's a big challenge. And for me, with martial arts and jiu-jitsu, I was getting a similar lens through that thing. So that takes me through my 30s. I have 3 kids who I love so much. But things started to change in my mid-30s. I'm 45 now. When my wife, Michelle, started to get sick. It didn't happen overnight, but about 10 months after the birth of our third, she had a psychotic break. She was diagnosed with bipolar, and that started us on a 5-year, really torturous path to try to understand that, try to plot for a future through that, try to preserve what dreams we had together, and tangle our way through that whole mess. And as you know, it was 2.5 years ago, she ended her fights, which was, I thought I'd been through difficult things before that, and going through that helped me understand, helped me put into perspective whatever I thought difficult was before that. And it's been the most remarkable path since then, laced with just almost impossible difficulty, but surprisingly like an equal, if not greater amplitude of beauty and goodness. And I think that sets the stage for a lot of what we might talk about today. If it's a rare thing to go through something like that, maybe at all, but certainly this early in life as you're pushing for so many different things. And I think not disengaging completely from any part in life has given me a lens to maybe see some things that might be earned a little later in life for some people, or I'm lifted by the idea that some part of my difficulty is going to allow me to share something that helps somebody earn something a little earlier or a little easier than maybe the path that I took. So excited to see where we go today.
I want to start off, again, it's not normal. It's unique for somebody to share so openly, so soon too, if you really think about it. So I'm really excited to see where this goes. I want to start off with an insensitive question. I think the listener will find this insensitive. You and I just recently talked about this. But when somebody goes through something that you've gone through, often people are not sure what to do, what to say. As you're grieving, for example, somebody can easily say, I don't know what you're going through. And we talked about this the other day. I'm sorry for your loss. I don't know what you're going through. I can't imagine what you're going through. I would love for you to give some insight before we get into what's going on with you. I think that it probably shocked a lot of people. The circumstance in which happened, but also the way you showed up, who you became was so inspiring to so many people around you. But it's a challenging circumstance for people to interact with somebody like you when this type of thing happens. So I'd love you to kind of give us some insight about this from your side of the table.
Yeah, it's a good question. And I say that because I don't know if I've ever felt a more profound sense of humility than to recognize that despite my natural propensity to understand people and the way things work and be a student of ancient philosophy and just all the things that animate us forward in difficulty. It's like I think I had a penchant for that, part of my childhood, and trying to answer that question is like, how am I going to survive the flood that I know is coming? I think I'd been a student of that for a lot of years before this happened, and I would have expected that would have landed me in some place to be helpful to someone who was really struggling. And in retrospect, it's remarkable to me how ill-equipped I would have been to be of service to someone like me in that, because the people who showed up did something very different than what I would have done. My natural instinct would have been to show up and share something from the Bible, or share something from ancient Stoic wisdom, or share something from my experience that would maybe allow the person to feel a little less hopeless, or feel a little bit more strong, or something in that vein. But my experience, at least, and I think it dovetails with others who I've spoken to who've been through similar things. And the main thing that you need is something very different. In fact, I would say that, and you'll hear people talk about this sometimes, that the same scripture that, for so much of their life has, inspired them and connected them and grounded them just feels empty in times of grief. It's actually none of those things that are most helpful to you. What you need more than anything else is a very simple thing. It's incredibly difficult, but it's a very simple thing, and it's to feel unalone. Our instinct when we show up with someone is, I think, out of preserving ourselves and the awkwardness and the discomfort, and to whatever extent we're empathetic, the pain that we can feel in that moment is to talk through it or to stay separate from it. And so the people who were most helpful to me showed up and did something very specific. They showed up and just started with some form of the phrase. It's like, tell me. Full stop. And that does a lot of different things. It allows you to sort the chaos in your mind. When you've lost the connecting structure that is the narrative of the rest of your life, it's like it's complete chaos in your mind, and it's not just that easy. It's mixed with all the things that you still must do. The ability that you have after 2 hours of sleep for weeks on end, not knowing what to do with any of that. So it's an incredibly chaotic and disruptive thing that happens in your mind. So just to be able to say that out loud through the lens of someone else is helpful. But I think far more than that, the biggest difficulty that you arrive at through that process is a feeling that you are, particularly if you've lost someone super close to you, that you're incredibly alone. Not only do you not have the physical presence of this person, not only do you not have the dreams that you had together, but something about having this new station in life convinces you that you're almost tainted and forever alienated. So when someone shows up and says the all too common, I can't even imagine what you're going through, I think that feels like the right thing to say, right? It's like, I'm here helping you understand that, like, I care, and like when I try, it's like, I can't even imagine what you're going through. So that should make you feel good because it's so hard.
Yeah, it almost feels compassionate to say, but in reality, what is it doing?
So what does it do? Exactly. What it does specifically is allow you to ruminate all the worst on the thing that you're already struggling with most, which is, how do I connect to what's next? If this person who loves me, because they're here, because they're in my orbit, they care about me, maybe they even loved my wife or the person I've lost, and if the best that they can muster feels like them trying to keep me at arm's length, because the truth isn't that you can't imagine. You love someone dearly. The truth is that you refuse to, because it's so incredibly awkward and uncomfortable and painful that you refuse to. So when someone you love is sitting there refusing to sit in the pain with you, where do you go? Whatever fears you have about how bad it is are confirmed and crystallized by this person who is supposed to be there doing something else. If this person can't do it. Creates even more
separation.
Right. Because I've been so struck by so many things, and one of them, early on, people in jiu-jitsu, people in the business, some version of, Matt, I wouldn't want this to happen to anybody, but if I could choose somebody to happen to, I think I'd choose you, because, I've always seen you being so strong. And
many people have told you that.
And you want to believe it.
Yeah, sure.
And some part of you maybe even can, because you look back at choices you've made, maybe even choices that you make early in grief, and you say, it's like, I could have chosen something worse. Like, I never retreated to alcohol. I didn't leave the house. And you hear stories about people who went through grief, and it's like, whoa, okay, that was a poor reaction. I'm really glad I didn't do that. So maybe some part of you believes that thing. But then you're forced to hold that in one hand while observing in the other hand that, the smallest stimuli can just thrust you into remarkable emotion. Just like chaotic, remarkable emotion. I remember driving in the car, typically it's, after dropping kids off or on the way to something, it's like, there it is again. It's like, it's just you in the car. Like, maybe somebody's going to drop by the house later. Maybe you'll moments
of aloneness.
Mm-hmm. And in those moments, you cannot help but feel what's there, and you feel the opposite of strong. In fact, you feel like you're impossibly weak, because what used to be so easy is now impossible. And it's like, well, how does this work? Am I this strong person who, can shoulder this, maybe even be an inspiration through this thing, mentor my kids well, continue to run my business, continue to teach people martial arts? Like, what real ability do I have to do that when I'm so tangled in these things that help me understand how weak I am?
Yeah.
And the more time that's gone by, the more I recognize that actually both of those are true. But the one that makes it weak is the more alienated you become. And the one that makes you strong is the more connected that you are. And so the gift that you have, and if you know someone in your orbit who is dealing with someone, the gift that you can give to them is to merely just show up with your presence. Don't ask. Don't
be
send.
with.
Yeah, it's not the meals. It's not offering to do something. That's a burden too, right? It's
Some
like, okay,
soup, Matt.
well, it's not just that. It's like, hey, let me know how I can help. Like, that's another thing that I probably would have said. Let me know how I can help. It's like, okay, I can barely even see straight. I got 2 hours of sleep, and now I need to use what little creative juice I have to try and figure out a way to help you feel like
You helped me. Yeah. I mean, that's why I wanted to talk about it, because it's such a, you don't really think about it until you've gone through it, and we had a really good conversation a couple weeks ago, and you've articulated that so well. I think it's important for people to hear. And I also want to say, like, you're an entrepreneur. I think it's really fun to talk about these things. You often go here because this is who you are.
Yeah.
But you run a thriving big business. You are, you've stepped out of the business quite a bit recently, but most of our relationship was when you were CEO.
Right.
That you may hold that title now, I don't know, but this is what I love talking about stuff like this with you, because you break such everyday patterns of identity, of how am I supposed to behave? What am I supposed to say? How am I supposed to act? How are people supposed to see me? And I think this is really, it's really important for people to like start breaking these patterns and start reflecting on this stuff. And you so masterfully do that.
Well, that's
for us.
Well, I'd like to think so, but it's one of the things that grief thrusts upon you is whatever mask or facade you've built when you're dealing in this chaos of trying to orient yourself in any way that makes sense. Whatever pretense you had about trying to come across a certain way, it's just, you don't have the bandwidth for it. So you have to go to something fundamental.
I have a question, that I've been really exploring is like when you're in grief or you're really angry or you're incredibly frustrated, often what people tell you is just count the things you can be grateful for. See the upside. See the light, Matt, in the darkness. And, maybe it's what people are trying to accomplish when they say something of the Bible, or they give you a quote or something somebody else told them that got them through that. I struggle with that. And I've kind of coined it as spiritual bypassing. Somebody else gave me that term. It's like, well, you're not really focusing, you're not really sitting in the pain or the suffering that you're going through. You're trying to bypass that with some sort of medicine. Let's call it gratefulness. Sometimes that works. Maybe it repositions your focus, repositions your mind, gets you out of the funk. I don't want to disrespect it with that word, but you know what I'm saying? Tell me about that. Can you have both? Is that healthy? Is it not? Tell us a little bit about that.
If there was one word that I could use to describe my trajectory through grief, it's that word. It's both. It's like, am I going to be okay? Am I dying inside? It's both. Am I grateful for this?
Both.
Do I want to kick the windows out of my life? It's both. And it's incredibly disorienting. I think most people who, have tried to be a student of things, I think I heard some point in my teens, it's like, you cannot simultaneously hold gratitude and some negative thing. I think it just doesn't work. And at my teenage and probably 20s-year-old station of life, it's like I actually found that to be true. It's like, when you meditate on the things that are there, it's like if you're ruminating on something dumb or superficial, it's a really powerful mechanism to pull you back out of that and into something that's more centered, that puts you back into your light. But what was so incredible about my trajectory through grief was so many of those old mechanisms failed me entirely. So you're already
on your knees and
trying to get some semblance of navigation through this fog. And now the instruments that have served you so well for so much of your life are now completely void. And so what does that work? I remember one specific point. I think it was maybe the first time I was able to muster coming back to our small Vistage group. And, one of the people in our group was going through something specific, and I was able to share what had materialized for me, and that this was a surprise. It's feeling that gratefulness. It's like I could convince myself that, based on my personal health, 3 kids that love me, a thriving business, an incredible network of people who genuinely cared about me, who really loved my wife enough to understand how awful it was that she was gone. That if you put that on paper and, surveyed not just, people in the world right now, but certainly historically through life, it's like, this is like 4,000 times more than what you need to get by in life. It's like, there's probably a lot of people that even still would trade spots to have many of these boxes checked. And so you would think, based on that old paradigm, it's like, well, that's going to make you feel good, right? Maybe some part of it does, but the feeling that comes up is, if I can have this and know how good it is and still feel the way that I do, how broken am I? How bad is it? How can I possibly escape this thing? If when I look at my life on paper and recognize how good it is and actually believe that and feel that, but that does nothing to remedy this pain, this must be permanent. And of course it's not true, but again, it goes back to that idea of both. It's we don't help ourselves much when we convince ourselves that it has to be one or the other. It's like there must be space for immense suffering and thriving simultaneously, because if there's not, that's just more than we can handle.
Yeah. What is showing up for you recently about truth? What is true?
That's a really good question. I think I heard Jordan Peterson speaking on, he was animated into emotion the way that he sometimes gets, and I maybe listen a little bit more when I see him coming from that place. And I think he went on to describe something that was like, when it really comes down to it, it's like there's really only 2 things. There's pain, and then there's truth/love. And that resonated really deeply for me, because as I was trying to get some needle back on the compass to figure out how to orient myself in my life, I was reminded of, it's like Descartes. It's like, I think, therefore I am. It's like, what can I say for absolute truth exists? Like, what's really there? It's like, okay, Descartes helped us see maybe beyond what we'd seen before of, okay, I'm thinking, so there's a thing that's going on there. Fast forward a few hundred years to somebody like Eckhart Tolle, and it's, I am the awareness that is aware that I am thinking. It's like, and that's more helpful. So yes, there is a thinker, but it's actually not you. You are the consciousness that is aware of that thinking. Okay, if I can orient myself there, that's good, because as these thoughts come up, it's like I don't have to identify with them. It's like, okay, that's something. This is really, really simple. We're just trying to get something to build a foundation on top of. And what materialized for me out of that is like, okay, what can I say that's going to broaden it beyond just an awareness that I'm thinking? And when I stripped everything down, it wasn't the trappings of my life, it wasn't my relationships or anything else. The thing that I began to build off, which felt like truth, or maybe my truth is that underneath all the pain, in tandem with the hope, there was in me a desire to manifest good, maybe to manifest the unique good that was possible out of my circumstance. It's like, I've become something unique in this thing. I grew up the way I grew up. I knew the people I know, run a business, I've engaged in martial arts, loved an extraordinary human being, lost an extraordinary human being after fighting with that human being. I'm currently raising 3 people. It's like there's a unique thing there. How do I yoke the uniqueness of that thing to do something good that couldn't be done but for this awfulness? And maybe can some part of that create an amplitude of meaning and goodness to offset what feels like a permanent darkness? that has resulted from this thing. Because when it starts, all you feel is the dark, and it's suffocating. And you're convinced that some part of that will never get better. And I wonder how different that is than the type of depression that takes people from us.
Yeah.
I don't know if I could tell you that they're different. So I was trying with just such desperation to find something to tether to, some truth. And I think that was it. As broken and as awful as I felt, I could feel an authentic desire that had a powerful amplitude, despite how weak I was, to manifest what I was into something good. And the miracle was that whether it was a bagel shop or waiting in a line somewhere or a friend, something about being so low for me created a fluency in pain and suffering. I could pick it up immediately on somebody.
Yeah. Elaborate on this. This is important.
So sometimes it's a sparkle in the eyes. Sometimes it's a heaviness. It's a way.
Sense it.
It's a way that the eyes are focusing on something, but nothing at the same time. It's almost like part of the story I was going to tell before about driving in the car and being so broken was, it's like I remember crying to the point where it's like this isn't even real crying. Like it's something supernatural. It's like it felt like so much was leaving my face, like not just tears. It's like it's heat and light and fog. It's like there's just so much leaving me. So I remember taking pictures of myself to just observe. It's like, what does a face actually look like when someone is feeling these things? And I was really surprised by the fact that it's like I looked kind of normal. It's like my eyes were red. There were maybe some tears you could see, but inside it was like this
fire.
Level 5 hurricane of emotion that like my body and my soul could not possibly contain. And I think something about sitting with that and coming to realize it's like, if I can be feeling this much and only manifesting this externally,
what must other people?
What are people masking? What hurt? And I've always been an emotional, vulnerable person. So it's like if this is me, who I think is more physically transparent than most, if this is my version of that, holy cow!
Yeah.
What type of Herculean shield have people built to hold this stuff back? And so something about answering that question had me observing people in a way that I hadn't before, and armed with the tool of tell me.
Yeah.
And because it's funny, like you're just desperate to just not even understand, but just like say it out loud, because it's going to do two things. It's going to orient you in some direction. It's going to allow you to discard something unhelpful, but way more than that, it's going to tell you what? There's a we involved here.
Yeah.
It's not just me. So the truth led me to, I think, the beginnings of a calling to initiate and gain a we, to communicate a we where people would otherwise be lost in an I. Because that's where we suffer. We suffer in I.
Yeah, talk more about that. And I want, before we start saying that, I think it's super important because I think it's really profound that you've experienced this in a way that, so many people are going through so much and we just pass each other on the freeway. Mm-hmm. Right. I'm going through so much. You're going through so much. He couldn't comprehend what I'm going through. So I'm not even going to begin to start opening up. Yeah. And we just pass each other on the freeway.
Yeah.
And I think what you're allowing people to, even with a vocabulary of tell me, it's trying to just invite it. Right.
Yeah.
I want to talk about I and we. Go.
Well, it goes back to, that idea of, am I strong or am I weak? And, that I think our weakness manifests most in the I. When Michelle didn't leave when she was around anybody. And people don't. Like when they're serious, it's not a cry for help. They don't go to a public place. Overwhelmingly, they go off to confirm that it's just them, by being in a physical space where it just is. So we suffer. We suffer by ourselves. And something about depression or something about grief or something else makes it all too easy to create a list of all the ways that we are alone, that it is just us, that we don't have anyone else. And so things that allow you to persist in that are really unhelpful. So that's why, conversely, and the thing that's so informative for people who have someone who's grieving in their orbit, what's so helpful there is you don't ask, you literally show up. And if you see them, you'll be able to do, like, if you miss them, that's fine. But it's almost like I could try on the idea myself. It's like, well, I don't know if I want to stop by. I don't want to bug them. It's like, bug them.
Yeah, just be there.
They can say no. And you'll be bugging them if you like brought your Bible verse or like have a song that means something to you that is just going to fall flat with them, that you want them to listen to.
Because they have to engage in a way that they may not want to.
Help me feel like I'm helpful, Ash. You're struggling. Like, help me feel like the good friend that I actually want to be.
Yeah.
It's that.
Give me some direction. Give me.
Even
I need direction.
It's the seeking of validation that makes us unhelpful there. But if it's literally just hat in hand, it's like, I might not be useful at all, but I will go to communicate one very specific thing, and that we are willing to sit in this with you. And I came across this the other day. Sawubona, I think, is a phrase in certain parts of Africa. It reminds me of like what I hear about from the Hawaiians talking about aloha, but there's so much more than just the salutation that's buried in that thing. But I think the specific translation is something like, Sawubona is, we see you. And the response is very similar. It's, we see you too. And this is said one-to-one. And it's like, well, who's the we? And the idea is twofold. It's the we is both all the ancestors and the collective sacrifice that led to the insane miracle of you being here, but it's also the collective good of all the people that you've touched in your life that you're now bringing into this conversation. If we're minding that well, if we're living well, we bring all the goodness of that thing and as little baggage as possible. The baggage would have us show up with someone who's grieving, needing the validation of having done it well.
Yeah.
The legitimate light and good in that thing would have you showing up and just say, tell me. And then if someone resists a little bit, it's like, I feel it on you. Like, help me understand. And then as they just start crying, it's like, you don't shift in your chair. You just sit there and keep looking at them with compassionate eyes that they can't mistake as something else. And you just wait for them to get something out. And whether it's snot, whether it's some type of blubbery, whatever else, like you sit there in the incredible discomfort of that thing and communicate to them. It's like, we are here. We are together. We will get through this. Because you can have an interaction with the person. It's like, I think back to being an angsty teenager, and it's like my most lonely moments, a lot of those were actually with people. Right? Because there wasn't a we, there was a them. There was a them and an I. But when people do it the right way, it's we. And you communicate that in such a beautiful and profound way by sitting with someone in their pain, as awkward as it is, as uncomfortable as it is. Try on I can't even imagine. It's like, imagine it. As they're talking or as they're sitting there crying, as they're not able to muster a word, take the person who would be most difficult to lose and imagine losing them. And then watch as the signature of that pain communicates we to the person who's struggling.
So proud of you. I want to talk about achievership. How has, and you're more than welcome to give a little bit of history about this, but let's not kid ourselves that you're a high achiever. So how has achievership helped you through this? And how has it hurt you?
That's a really, really good question. So much of my upbringing was based on the foundational belief that I must be achieving in order to be worthy. And it's not like I'm trying to say that my parents, give me some horrible thing. It's one of the things I've learned through this process is like, you're giving your kids something. And at certain parts of their life, it's going to be a huge blessing. At other parts, it's going to be really challenging for them. So this thing that I was given or that I learned in my childhood of validation and worth through achievement served me so beautifully for the vast majority of my life, through an athletic career, through academics, through business, through marriage. The idea of wanting to be a good husband, of wanting to be a good father, of wanting to be a martial artist that was worthy of the black belt. All of these things were so helpful. When Michelle had her break in, I think that was 2017, I took a step away from the business. Instead of working the hours that I was working, leading all the having a direct report for all the major leaders in the business, I stepped away from that and was working something like 12, 15 hours a week. And I think part of me was optimistic that was going to improve things. It's like, you're going through stressful chapters of your life and business. It's like, one day when I'm 65, it's like, it'll be so nice to not be so stressed out with this thing, to have this be somebody else's problem, or to be, counting my money on the sidelines as other people toil with things because I've earned it. Whatever story you end up telling yourself about how all this current difficulty will be worth it in some future amount of time. And so fast forward to this thing, and for reasons that were difficult to fully comprehend at the time, and without knowing that it was likely going to be permanent for me, it's like it's the right thing to step away. It's like no amount of success at work is going to compensate for something bad happening and being able to attribute that to like not being all in at home. So I was all in at home. And for decent chapters of those first couple of years, like Michelle had months where she was actually really, really good. So here I am at home, just enjoying life with my wife and my former college soccer teammates and all these other wonderful human beings who had grown to call my business home, were working and thriving and sacrificing and, shouldering, in my mind, what was my work. And I don't feel like the 65-year-old
like
retired guy.
You don't feel prouder.
Or even again, go back to the belief. I must be achieving in order to be worthy. It's like something started to change after about 4 months. It's like I'd been less stressed than I'd ever been before. It's like there were chapters of Michelle's health that like would flare up, but it's like it was literal flare-ups. It was like a day or an hour or something else, and then it's like right back to normal. We're just here loving our kids, outside in San Clemente. It's such a wonderful day. So that was an interesting thing to try out. It's like all of a sudden this thing that had animated me into, so much success was now almost eating away like a cancer, convincing me it's like, you're not worthy at all. You're actually kind of a piece of shit. You're leaving it to others to do things that you should be doing. So that thing that was so helpful for so long started to be really, really toxic. And like we tackle so often in Vistage, right? It's like, okay, you see the belief. That's fantastic. Wouldn't it be lovely if just seeing it made it dissolve, right? It's like you're not undoing 40 some odd years of training. Like this thing's in you. And okay, you're conscious of it. That's great. But you can't not do it. So what do? You attempt to create an affirmation that is powerful enough that you can at least hold that in the other hand, and that can balance out, or hopefully best case scenario, start to transcend a little bit what your wiring is. And for me, it was some version of, again, with my athletic history, those examples made the most sense. It's like, it's a feat of something amazing for, you or me to grab a golf club and hit the ball straight 300, 350 yards. It's like, we'd be high-fiving, grabbing an extra beer on the golf course with that type of hit. It's routine for so many people. Somebody like Tiger Woods wouldn't think twice about it, right? Does that mean it's unextraordinary? Because it wasn't difficult?
Right.
Of course not. So it was an exercise in understanding that, yes, while I had worked for so long to achieve, and while that some part of that effort in my mind had made me worthy, that I had actually become something through all that achievement. And that the hope, again, it sounds like, your inner critic would tell you, it's like, oh, you're doing a great job of rationalizing this weakness, buddy. Good for you. Like, we're not buying this, just so you know. It's like, keep weaving the thing, but I'll poke holes in it. But I was able to try on that idea that just because it doesn't require labor or active stress or to be crushed under the weight of that thing, which is how it always worked before, that it's not valuable.
Yeah.
And it's been so interesting in the couple of years since Michelle is gone, where I've worked even less than I had before, to show up, and we discussed this a little bit, that the critic does something else with the feedback I'm getting now. But the feedback that I'm getting now is, after being mostly a silent participant in meetings, just one comment here or there, and people in my business will pull me aside sometimes after and share in what feels like an earnest way that something about what I said, or more often than that, just something about what my presence can communicate, just creates a mirror for them or a filter for them through which certain things crystallize a little more than they would have otherwise. And that's so interesting, right? It's like I'm not actively doing anything.
It's not like you're giving somebody an answer or you're asking questions to solve some tactical thing.
Or like it's some sacrifice, or like it's some horrific amount of work that is allowing this to come to pass. It's literally just something about the nature of being is allowing value to flow, which is a really powerful antidote to that idea that only good stuff flows from striving and achievement.
Yeah, or stress.
Yeah. Or sacrifice, or whatever the thing may be. Now, you wouldn't want to exist only there. It's like, I've got 3 kids at home. I'm trying more and more to answer the question, I can be something all day, but what do they actually see me doing? And then how is that mentoring? So that the critic can still run wild inside. It's like the critic
ain't going anywhere.
Yeah.
Pick your poison.
That's it. And so it of course loves to tell me, it's like, well, Matt, these people like want to feel like good people. So they're trying to make you feel good about the fact that you're not working. Like that's all that is.
Yeah.
And it's like your kids, like they're not in trouble now, but your lack of active doing things is going to manifest in some bad way for them. But the more time that goes by, the less prone I am to believing that, the more that the critic himself starts to sound like more of an imposter. And it's like that's one of the real gifts in grief is you cannot do all the things you did. And yet, maybe more than ever, if you're aiming at the lights, you recognize your ability to bring good to the people who are around you.
Yeah.
For things that you maybe didn't even connect on before. And that's a powerful antidote to what the critic would tell you about what your worth is.
Yeah, I mean, effort and value shows up for me, right? So previously, your effort would have been, I got to show up 40, 50 hours a day. The value I'm bringing is all the tactical solutions I'm providing and all the Excel spreadsheets I'm doing, and that's the effort to value. Now, your effort may be minimal in terms of just showing up, being present, but that value now equates to such a different value than you otherwise would have expected. Maybe a value you don't even know quite yet because people are not communicating it back to you.
Right.
And I think that's okay. I think there's an oscillation too. This is a phase where you have the unique skill sets to be able to, the effort that you're providing provides a value. And that may, and we've talked about your future a little bit, that may oscillate back to like doing different things.
Yeah.
But I think what I love about, every time we meet, we do like quarterly coffees or whatever. And we hang out and we talk about life and all this fun stuff. But when we get together in small groups and talk about business, I love how put off you are. None of this is relevant.
Yeah.
None of this matters. This is not the question we're really asking.
Right.
This is not really the problem we're trying to solve.
Yeah.
And you have this incredibly unique ability to transcend the material and get to what is it that we're really trying to know. What is the truth? What is the ask? What is the childhood belief? What is the pattern? And I hear you in the back of my head all the time when I am lost and I need to do a lot of effort.
Yeah.
I need to show up to the office. And look, I'm not saying that you can just sit around like a Buddha and provide effort to the world, but I'm saying that there is these patterns that we're caught up in, similar to the patterns that you were caught up in for a long time. Is that in order for me to get value, I have to show up to work and I have to do the thing. But sometimes that's BS. It's self-serving.
What is our calling and what station of life are we in, right? It's like for a child, at least for a child like me, it's like an achievement mindset was the perfect thing. It's like it gave me something to do.
It served you incredibly well.
Like, I don't care how much of an old soul you are, all these things that we can be born with, what your acumen is for, intellect or just whatever else. Like as a kid, it's like, you got to do the work. And in your 20s, no one is talented enough still to just like have arrived at life. And it's like, okay, I'm just going to like share with the world the way I see things for the rest of my life. And nor do I think that exists when you're 40 something. But if you've been striving for long enough and you've been through enough things, it's like at 40, you should be able to be living in some part of being instead of action that is the right amount.
Yeah.
Because when you think about it, it's like, whatever age you have in your mind as like having earned it, and, being allowed to just kind of like look back on a life well lived and just enjoy what's left of the physical ability that you have in your waning years. Like we would celebrate that person for doing that. There aren't natural milestones that, like graduations, that put you from one phase onto the next step on your way to that process. It's only an internal looking to say, it's like, is this thing that I've done for so long still serving me?
Yeah.
And if my goal was to be CEO of a massive company, it's like, then I should still be all the way in and sharpening those skills and continuing to move in that direction. But that's not what I'm called to do. It's not what I enjoy anymore. It's like, so yeah, what is the intersection between, what you enjoy, where you're most valuable, and at what station of life are you to be able to not succumb to laziness, but also not let the critic run wild and just tell you that you're a piece of crap for not doing things that you used to do a couple of years ago.
Life is complex.
It's complex. Yeah, a lot of places to get hung up. And
I would love, this shows up for me. I have not experienced what others would consider incredible hardship in life, right? I haven't perhaps lost somebody in my life, or I didn't grow up on the rough streets or things like that. And I think part of me feels like, well, I have to be able to suffer. I have to have suffered in order for me to align with someone else, right? I'd love for you to share that, because I think you've suffered something traumatic now, let's say.
yeah,
But for all intents and purposes, you've had a beautiful childhood. You've been incredibly successful. I think it's a farce, is what I'm saying.
I think you're right.
Yeah, I think it's a farce. I think it's our own insecurities that make us show up that way. It's our own lack of worthiness. Like, oh man, I have so much. I've built so much. I'm working on myself, and yet I'm still not worthy because I haven't suffered some pain or some lack, right? And that's where our current lack comes from.
Right.
So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's that reminds me of something else through this I and we process that I became aware of. And I think this might be more unique to my path through trajectory than it is for some. I know some have a very averse response to this type of thing flowing to them. But there's been a couple of examples where, in talking to someone, when I'm more healed and I'm not just in the complete depths, where someone will catch themselves identifying with my difficult chapter by, talking about the loss of their dog or something like that. And from the outside looking in, it's almost like you cringe at that and say like, oh my God, they're so different. Like, don't do that to them. But no part of me ever in that process felt like, how dare you conflate your dog and my wife? Like, no part of me did that. What I did instead was, and it dovetails with what you're saying, it's like, you don't have to have lost your wife to do this thing. What you're doing right now is, in the way that you best know how, identifying with me. You're attempting to get in with me. You're going to the most awkward place that you can think of. Not to say it's like, oh, hey, I lost my dog, you should feel better. It's like, if they were doing that, it probably would have made me mad.
Yeah.
But what they were doing instead, it's like, I'm attempting to actually feel what you're feeling. It's not, I can't even imagine. It's like, I'm actively imagining, and I want to share where I'm coming from. And if me feeling this thing makes me feel like this, I can imagine that you're in a much worse place. So there's a we here.
Yes.
There's a we here. So I don't think you have to suffer for there to be a we on this thing. And how that translates to professional pursuits. One of the things I love to do most, and the person I selected to take over my spot in the business attuned me to this pretty early. It was before I lost Michelle, but it was after I'd taken a big step away from the business. And he ended up saying to me, it's like, Matt, recognize that, I was 42, 41 at the time. He's like, recognize, like, 50-year-old Matt is going to look back on this and almost laugh. Like, remember when that stuff was hard? It's like, because we're going to have so much wisdom then. And that became really powerful. It's like, you go back to some time in your life when you feel really, really small. For me, it was, going to the mall, and I think my parents demanded that I go explain to the person who gave me my piece of pizza that something was wrong with it or something. And I was terrified by that. As a insecure, introverted little dude, like the idea of talking to an adult at the time was just crushing to me. I was so afraid of doing it. And I look back at that now and just kind of laugh, right? It's like, is it hard to talk to adults now? If something's wrong with my order, can I not talk about it? No, it's really, really easy now. Well, what's the difference? What's the actual difference between those two things? And so you can look back and almost like forgive the tender little person who did that thing. And it's that same like benevolent, fatherly, backward-looking thing that you can actually go into the future and still do. It's like, what does 60-year-old Ash have to say about the struggles of a young father, about the difficulty in running this business while trying to do a podcast, while desperately seeking outward, while trying to like heal and secure and stabilize what's inward? It's like, buddy, I recognize.
You've asked me this question before.
Yeah. So it's one of my favorite questions.
You've asked me this question about I'm 37 now. I think when you asked me, I was 35. But what is your 45-year-old Ash say, and what does your 25-year-old Ash say?
Yeah, how would 25-year-old Ash been crushed by this, and rightfully so? What do you see now? And what does your future wisdom that you're going to have? That's the thing, too. It's you're going to have this wisdom. And it's like, well, how do I learn from it before I know what it is? It's like, sit there for a second.
And I think it immediately goes to what we were talking about before, is like, just give yourself grace and be present. Like, we get so lost in all the crap that my 45-year-old self is like, dude, I'm so proud of you. Amazing. I can't believe it, what you're going through. You're doing so good. Just be patient.
The thing that's crystallizing more and more, and it comes up perfectly in what you just said, is I'm starting to wonder if it's less about manifesting some Herculean thing than it is about just not screwing up what was naturally going to come to you.
Yes.
And
Stay out of your own way.
And I think false urgency is one of the main things that'll get us on a bad path there.
Victim number one right here.
And it makes sense, right? It's like, go back to an achievement mindset. It's like, okay, there's a season. There's going to be one champion. What are those people doing right now? If they're working harder than you, you're not going to win that thing. It's like, there's urgency there. Totally makes sense. This is not a single championship thing. This is an arrival spiritually within you. It's like, how do I continue to manifest good that I'm uniquely capable of manifesting while understanding my nature in a way where I don't screw up what I'm going to accomplish anyway?
What is the advice for people? I mean, we were talking about my life in weeks, right? Is like the natural tendency is like, well, then I should just be doing stuff. Let me just keep doing stuff, and then something will fall in.
Yeah.
But if the truth is that we just have to stay out of the way for whatever is naturally going to manifest, and not knowing when we're going off path or on path. What advice do you have for people on this?
The first time I competed,
and then we're going to talk about your manifestations in a minute.
The first time I competed at black belt, it had been a couple of years because I'd had my second and third kid, and having hurt my shoulder somewhat before and been less than super useful with a newborn, I didn't want to put myself in a spot to be there. But kids are grown at least to the point where you're not double fisting kids walking around different places. So it's like, okay, I feel like I want to earn this. Like let me compete as a black belt. So I did, and my mentor who gave me my belt knew that I'd been working on a very specific set of techniques that I was excited to showcase. But he pulled me aside before the match and said, like, Matt, I know how hard you've worked to do something. He's like, do all that. He's like, just don't miss what your opponent gives you. There's this idea in judo. I think the Japanese word is kazushi. And I don't know if I know the exact translation of it, but the concept is in judo, if I push you, then you pull me an equal amount, like both of us remain balanced. I pull you and you push me an equal amount, we both remain balanced. There's this idea that it's like, we need to be balanced in life. It's like, okay, I want to be equally pushing. I want to be equally, at peace in my soul. Like I'm balanced. Kazushi is the idea that you only make gains with an intentional off-balancing, and it displays so beautifully in that art, because it is only when one person gets a superior grip, creates a tremendous amount of off-balancing, where both of you are falling, but because of the grips, on the way to the ground, they get rotated to the ground and you stay on top. So it was only because you intentionally got off balance, like in the most aggressive way you possibly could have, that on the way to the ground you found success. And I think that's a really powerful metaphor to describe this thing. It's like, so there are going to be chapters for you going forward, regardless of how well you manifest this idea of what you want for the rest of your life. It's like, you need to be all in your business.
Yeah.
You know, your president quits, you know, exports from China get shut down. It's like, there are going to be chapters where you need to be 150% all in, or that thing's just going to burn. And maybe that's not what's best. Maybe it is. And you need to be okay with that. Who knows? And there's going to be chapters, call it grief, call it difficulty in your marriage, call it sickness of a kid, where you're going to have to let all that go. And so I love this idea of Kazushi, because it's not like all things balanced perfectly at the same time. It's an intentional off-balancing in a direction to accomplish something important when the timing is right. And I like that a lot, because it's like, that's how you take what your opponent, if life is the opponent, is giving you.
I want to explore a couple more concepts. I've been really toiling with this difference between authenticity and vulnerability recently. And, you know, authenticity is sort of this like for me, this is like this overused word that, I love how you're showing up. You're being so authentic. And by definition, if I'm calling you authentic, it means that you're being, you previously were not authentic, unauthentic. But now you're showing up in this authentic way, so I like you more. Right? And so it's like this overused compliment. In fact, people are teaching people, find yourself so you can be more authentic, because previously you were all fake.
Right.
That wasn't you.
Yeah.
And maybe vulnerability is a contrast to that, but I'd love your perspective on this, because all of a sudden you're not more authentic. You were always authentic. You're always just you. And what is authentic? Is it that you're better at being more vulnerable, meaning sharing who you are, than others? So I'd love you to, let's explore this.
So much of this comes down to definitions. It's like, so I think you gave me a definition of authentic that you don't like. Give me a definition of authentic that you do like.
Yeah, good point. I think that the definition of authentic that I do like is being who you are without the projection that other people expect you to be. So like if I'm pretending, if I'm acting here because I know that that's what Matt wants of me or wants me to behave, right? Or maybe the questions we were talking about is, I can't imagine. Maybe that sounds that could be inauthentic because it's not who I am. It's actually I'm projecting a behavior or a personality that other people expect me to be. That's the definition I don't like.
Yeah, I'm reminded of the Marcus Aurelius quote. It's let's spend no more time wondering what a good man should be. It's like, let's just be one.
Yeah.
I think that's an easy place to get hung up, right? It's like, well, what are we really talking about? What does authentic really mean? How am I supposed to show up? Am I the right combination of vulnerability and, pushing forward? And it's like very, very difficult questions to answer. But for me, I go back to this place of, I think the attempt or the desire to want to find a balance between vulnerability and authenticity, if that's even a thing, it comes from this idea of balance, almost like this false idea of that balance is the goal, right? What if instead it's like, it's okay to not even be asking the question in some way? The thing that's coming up for me, which is different than what we've spoken about before, but I went to a end of the year party. So it had been about 9 months since Michelle had passed, and about 20 minutes into the party, I recognized what the party was. It was like 6 or 7 people in different healing modalities, kind of on a mystic side, which I'd had almost no familiarity with for a long time before Michelle passed. And like 3 lost souls like me. I'd lost my wife. There was a couple who their son had just recently become paraplegic, and there was someone else who'd lost a child. And it's like, we're here to like be like spiritually cuddled by these people. And I was actually so grateful for it at the time. But as I'm just trying to engage in a meaningful way and not just be crushed under the weight of feeling small at that thing, I happened upon these two people who were talking about some book that I wasn't familiar with. They asked me the title. They asked me if I was familiar with it. I said no. And they said, it doesn't matter. And they went on to describe what the book described about a soul contract. And they said it's well known in the world of spirit, and this is my recollection, it's well known in the world of spirit that you get to choose how you manifest, like where you go. And it's really well known that choosing earth is going to have by far and away the most suffering. And then they said something else interesting, and being human on earth is even more suffering than that. And this was one of a handful of pivot points through my grief process that things changed in a permanent way for the better. And I don't know if they went on to describe this, or some part of me just made peace with the idea that I chose this. So you've had mentors, if any person who has good parents has felt this thing, it's like it is something extraordinary to have someone who knows you believe in you. Like that animates you into the light and potential more than maybe anything else. It's like the apex of the we, right? It's not just we're connected. It's you are connected and known and believed in, and actually you have a responsibility.
Yeah, I love that.
To fulfill the uniqueness that is you in this life.
Yeah.
So imagine for a second.
Very powerful when you feel it.
Yeah. So imagine for a second that it's not just someone who's alive. It's this timeless thing, which is actually you. And it was you looking at the precipice of this life saying, ooh, that's going to stretch me. I know me. That's really, really going to stretch me. Let's do it. And that was a legitimate pivot point for me, because it's like if it almost gave understanding or even providence to the pain. It's like you were supposed to feel this specific thing. You actually knew that it was going to feel this bad. In fact, you were the architect of this specific pain, knowing that based on how much you care, how much you were going to love this person, how close you were going to be, that was going to create an apex of pain that was going to do something incredible, and it was going to be worth it. And you chose. You were brave enough to choose, and not somebody else choosing for you, because that's enough,
or
right?
A victim, or it happened to you.
Yeah, because sometimes parents can want a certain college for kids, and as much as they make that hard on the kids go through it, and it's like, I'm kind of glad they did that. It's like maybe I would have chose something else, but it's like I got a good life. This feels pretty good. No, it's not somebody else. This is you. You chose this. You knew exactly how hard this was going to be, and you believed that through that pain you were going to beautify and strengthen in a way that was going to do something extraordinary. And I still to this day don't know whether or not that's true, but that has become kind of like an animating ethos that continues to allow me to find the kazushi in, whether it's right now it feels like mostly sharpening the axe, readying myself to do the chopping that I think only me with the unique experience of having done this is going to be able to do.
Matt, what is love?
I was thinking about this earlier. I heard a song that's come up a couple times since Michelle's passing, and it's Forgive from Trevor Hall. Beautiful song, just incredibly beautiful song. And I was struck by today, I think I'd felt this before, but I was especially struck by it today, driving here, that I wondered if the idea of love would come up, or if some facet of this would come up. And I've been so struck by the idea that I never felt like I even needed to forgive Michelle. It's like I was never angry about her leaving, because I understood her so well. All I ever felt was just sadness that she had to go through it.
Yeah.
That was it. So when you ask me, what is love? It's like, I think the reason why I didn't feel a negative, angsty thing about her departure, at least in so much as I was angry with her, was because I understood. I really understood. And if it's been such an extraordinary thing to recognize that, me with my 17 or so years with Michelle, I 13 or so years of marriage that I knew her so well inside and out. But what has been truly extraordinary is it's like I will have people still come into my orbit and share something about Michelle that I feel like only I should be able to know for having known her so long, and they knew with 1 or 2 interactions with her. And this idea of love has crystallized so beautifully through my loving of this person, because Michelle, more than anyone I had ever met, could see people. I think, part of the way that she was raised in her house, and, her version of the achievement mindset that I discussed for me was, I must anticipate the emotions of the people that I am with in order to be worthy. And so she was amazingly good at it. And it gave her a sense of very quickly being able to understand. And I think something about having dealt with her crosses in life had made her extremely receptive to this signature of pain that I had described earlier. And something about that allowed her very easily to just understand where people were. So what crystallized today as I was driving in was, I don't know if I can tell you a great difference between being understood, like being really understood. You talk about authenticity, you talk about vulnerability. It's like if both of those things are sterling, like how much is someone going to know you? If like there's no filter, no pretense, like what is somebody going to get to know about you? Well, Michelle had the gift of actually piercing right through all those things and really getting to know people. And I don't know if I can tell a big difference between that level of understanding and what love is. My first Vistage mentor, a handful of his things still stick with me in terms of things that he said, and one of them was, there's such a small difference between being listened to and being loved that I don't know if I can tell the difference. This is almost like a furtherance of that same idea. It's like the I that exists in someone else that seeks to create a we and is skilled in doing that creates a connection. And it's in that understanding that like the opportunity for angst or resentment or all these negative things that we can feel towards other people or ourselves, it wilts away in that thing. Michelle would so often talk about the idea that during matters of trespass, someone had showed up in a small way. It's like she would animate this caricature of them of just a grown-up version of a very badly hurt kid. And how in the world would you would you say these things to a 5-year-old?
Right.
No. It's like, but they're an adult. It's like, granted, they had some responsibility at some point to probably do this thing better, but it's not like it was just evil after evil that happened. It's like you sit in any therapist's office and understand, it's like, well, where does this come from? It's like, there's something very early that trained this in them. And it's like, so there's something that people didn't do. Maybe they haven't awakened to the full responsibility that they have to transcend that as an adult, which is our responsibility. But some part about that gives us an opportunity to give people kind of a benefit of the doubt. It's not a free pass. It's an understanding. It's like, because if you can really understand through the bad behavior, through all the facade that the person is so desperate to maintain, and see the real person that's there, that feels for me like a incredibly robust fertility for the thing that I want to believe is love. And it's the thing that I feel still for Michelle, that I will always feel. I understood her.
Going back full circle just to tell me. Yeah. Amazing. I love you so much.
I love you,
so
Ash.
proud of you, man. I think you are in a season, you just mentioned it, that of sharpening the axe. I can't wait to see what you do next. I can't wait to be part of the journey with you. You're going to change so many people's lives. I'm just proud of you. I love you so much. Congratulations on coming through it, working through it, doing the hard work. I think I love you. That's it. How can people connect with you if they want to reach out, if they maybe need you in their life or in their orbit? What's a good way to connect with you?
That's an excellent question. As I've been healing, I've needed to become mindful of my bandwidth and boundaries. So I'm just now awakening to going external again. So I have an email address. I have an Instagram. I'm not super active on either one. So that might be a question I need to answer in time.
Well, we'll put whatever you feel comfortable in the show notes if people want to connect with you. But any final? Well, I have one final question. Then I'll let you speak to the listeners. What does it mean to live a rich life?
I think one of the things that creates something that is a huge part of what I would describe as my wealth is something that I have grown to understand. There's so many lessons, but the one that's cropping up right now isn't actually grief related, or it's at least a different kind of grief. And it's the idea that crystallized through the hardest chapter of my professional career, which was on the heels of losing one of our most valuable pieces of intellectual property. I was crushed under the weight of what felt like something that was so unjust. It's like, what do I do with this? It's like, the achiever athlete in me was sort of like, how do I tip the scales back? How do I prepare for the win next time against, this adversary? And it consumed me for months at night, where I was up at night kind of seething with the injustice of this thing by being crushed under the weight of that. And it wasn't until I awakened to this idea that I was able to transcend that and get to a much better place. And it's come up times and time again, less in business and more in relationships. And it's the idea that in times of trespass, so somebody's done something against you, that there is almost no intersection between success and justice. You actually have to pick one of the two. If you want to aim for what someone deserves, then there will be reciprocity in that, there will be justice in that. But if you take an honest snapshot of what's important, what you're called to do, what your responsibilities are, where you are at your best, it's almost definitely going to lead you away from those things and just cement you further in the quagmire of awfulness that started you in the first place. So it's the idea of, for me, I think being rich is not being beholden to a compulsion to be the executor of justice, but to have the clarity on what success looks like for me and all the people and all the things I care about most, and to let nothing get in the way of manifesting good there.
Well, that's a wrap.
Great stuff, Ash.
Any final thoughts for the listener? We left a lot on the table.
We might just need to come back and do it again, brother.
We may need, I mean, it's impossible to have a live conversation with you in only an hour, but I appreciate you doing this, man. Shows a lot of heart, so I appreciate it.
Great stuff, brother.
Listener, if you guys have any questions, definitely reach out to me. I'll put Matt's contact information into the show notes, and thanks so much.
Great stuff.
God bless.
Thank you, brother. Talk to you soon.
If you enjoy this podcast or find it valuable in any way, you have a duty to share it with someone else who may need to hear this message or can get value from this content. And remember to subscribe to the podcast and leave a review so we can continue to bring massive value to you. And go to our website, therichequationpodcast.com, to be added to our mailing list for special access and content.
Thank you for listening to the Rich Equation Podcast with Ashish and Matthew. Do you want more ideas on how to live rich? Go to richequationpodcast.com for show notes and resources. Then take 1 minute to leave Ashish a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. And we'll see you on the next episode.